Hello and welcome to my record room in sunny Los Angeles. Today, the first of several videos, I'm doing something a little bit different, taking a break from the gems from different catalog series to bring you a whole wide range of records. And these are records that I've bought in the last 3 months since I started going back out to record stores and buying some really amazing used classical vinyl after a long period of really not getting anything at all and certainly not going to record stores. So today we're going to focus on probably the biggest and most famous record store in Los Angeles, and that is Amoeba Music. Now, when Amoeba Music came into town, it was kind of extraordinary event. It was this huge warehouse full of new and used CDs. At that time, it was probably some 20 years ago. At that time, people were not back into vinyl, so there really wasn't a great deal of vinyl, and it was mainly CDs, a lot of used CDs. It was a great way to pick up all kinds of stuff at very low prices, including lots of new releases where the record companies gave surplus stock to Amoeba and they were able to sell stuff at a discount. Mainly rock and jazz, but my goodness, I found all kinds of amazing classical material there. Now, when Amoeba Music opened in Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard, the unfortunate side effect was it did put out of business a number of really wonderful independent record stores that have been around for ages. And I'm going to mention in particular Aaron's, which was on Highland, and then Rhino Records, which was on Westwood Boulevard in West LA. So that was really rather sad. I've still got many records that I bought at both of those stores. I could find amazing bargains. Now, this was back in the late 90s, noughts. You could find so much amazing used vinyl in really good condition. Anyway, back to Amoeba. So the old Amoeba Records was in this fantastic warehouse space on Sunset Boulevard, right next to the ArcLight Cinemas and the celebrated Cinerama Dome. Well, they had already decided to move. That whole area of Hollywood has been developed to an incredible degree, and they sold up, and during lockdown they moved to a new location on Hollywood Boulevard. Now, those of us who loved the old Amoeba, we still miss the old place because it was vast and roomy, and it was just an amazing place. You would walk in there and good luck getting out within half an hour. It's more like several hours. Anyway, I made my first visit to Amoeba since the pandemic lockdown earlier this year, actually with my daughter and her boyfriend. They were visiting us in Los Angeles. And we had a wonderful time going into the new store. It is smaller, but they've managed to concentrate an awful lot of product into the store. Now, here's the deal with buying used classical vinyl. There are certain stores you get to know where you know they're always going to carry pretty good quality classical stuff. And I'm thinking in particular here in LA of Record Surplus, which I'll be doing a separate video about shortly. Now, Amoeba, the pickings in used classical are very varied. A lot of the time you just find a lot of the very standard records you expect to find anywhere, not in necessarily the best condition, and a lot of American pressings of, for example, EMI and Decca. And you never want to buy American pressings of those labels. You always want to go for ones manufactured in either England or in Holland. But the thing about Amoeba is you never know what you're going to find. And every so often it's clear that they've scored a really nice classical collection. And on my first visit to Amoeba back in January, or was it in December, I found some amazing stuff. And I also went back like a couple of months later and found even more amazing stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through this pile of records. It's going to go through fairly quickly, I hope, and talk about what I found and why it's so interesting. So I'm going to start with a miscellaneous bunch of records running a wide range of repertoire and performances. And I'm going to begin with this one, which is on the wonderful early music label L'Oisellier. This is an imprint of Decca Records. And this label had been around, I think, even going back to the 50s and certainly through the 60s and 70s, but it really took off with the emergence of the period instrument movement and performers like Christopher Hogwood and the Academy of Ancient Music. And there are all kinds of records quite apart from ones by Hogwood and his band. And this is a really interesting one. I didn't even know about this, and I didn't even know about these pieces. These are nocturnes by Haydn, and essentially it's chamber music. As far as I can tell, what these pieces are derived from was a series of commissions that Haydn got for King Ferdinand IV of, let's see if I can remember this, King Ferdinand IV of Naples and the Twin Sicilies. And these were for a rather unusual instrument, a little bit like the hurdy-gurdy. It's an instrument that doesn't exist anymore. And basically what Haydn did was that after he wrote these pieces, he then reworked them for a small chamber group, and in fact took these pieces with him to London, where he had his very successful series of stays where he wrote the London symphonies, commissioned by the great impresario Salomon, and just it was a wonderful period in his career. But these pieces I do not know. I haven't played this yet, and I can't wait to try it. It's got lots of people from you would expect to see in the Academy of Ancient Music, people like Catherine McIntosh, Stephen Preston, Nicholas McGeegan, who's gone on to have his own early music group here in America, and the whole is directed by Alan Hacker. So this looks like just a wonderful set of Haydn chamber music. Really don't need any excuse to buy more Haydn. Next up, one of the great pianists on the Decca catalogue, and that is Alicia de Larrocha, but doing some really less well-known repertoire, the Cacciatorian Piano Concerto and the Franck Symphonic Variations. And this is with Raphael Frubeck de Burgos and the London Philharmonic Orchestra. Now, as you can see, this is issued on the London label, which was basically the American imprint of Decca. Now the thing is, you must not buy London records that are made in America. The EQ is different, the pressing quality is not so good, but even if it doesn't say so on the outside, and often in later issues it does say that it's made in England, you can go to the label right there and you can see just in small letters up here, made in England. And that means it's more or less identical to the Decca issue. I've got a few of Alicia de Larrocha's records. They're absolutely wonderful. I don't really know the Cacciatorian Piano Concerto, and this is just great fun. Beautiful, colorful, romantic orchestration. Great fun. Now here was a record I didn't even know existed. And this was on this label that you come across quite often in the used bins, the Musical Heritage Society. That's this. And basically they're kind of like a Reader's Digest of the time. They would license records from different catalogs and put them out on their own label. Now the reason I was attracted to this is, first of all, the repertoire, Britten's Ceremony of Carols, and also some more religious music by Britten, but the Ceremony of Carols is the most famous one, and it's an absolutely glorious work. It's written for harp, boys' voices, a setting of various medieval carols. I talked about this in my Christmas video about carols, but the reason I was really interested to get this is that the performance is by the Choir of Christ Church, Oxford, directed by Francis Greer. Now, Francis Greer took over the choir from Simon Preston, and when I was at Oxford, Simon Preston was directing the choir, and then shortly thereafter, Francis Greer took over, and actually Francis Greer was the organ scholar during Simon Preston's period at the choir, and Francis went to my old school. He was still at my old school my very first term there. This is a fantastic choir at the peak of its powers, and it's just lovely to have this performance. Now, one of the record labels, you're going to find quite a lot of their product in the used record bins, the used classical section, is Nonesuch. Back in those earlier days, the 70s, 80s, 60s, Nonesuch was mainly, I think maybe exclusively, a classical label. Today they do quite a bit of rock music, a range of interesting artists like Ry Cooder. They do quite a bit of world music like the Buena Vista Social Club, etc. But you're going to find a lot of classical titles in the used bins. Now, the thing with Nonesuch, as with many of the American record labels, is the covers can be a little bit battered, but then lurking within you'll often find a very clean record, which is often the case with classical records in the used sections. You're going to find the record in pretty good condition, at least better than the rock and pop stuff you're going to find it elsewhere in the store. Now, the reason to go for these Nonesuch records is just the amazing breadth of repertoire. They recorded all kinds of interesting stuff, from early music through to very avant-garde contemporary stuff. And the other thing to look out for is any records engineered by this team, which is Mark J. Orbert and Joanna Nikrans. And then often their records are also mastered by Bob Ludwig, who is one of the great mastering engineers of all time. And this is a wonderful record that I found completely new, sealed. This is of piano music by George Gershwin, played by William Bolcom, himself a really fine composer. And this is full of just lovely stuff. You know, we've got all the classic Gershwin tunes like Somebody Loves Me, Fascinating Rhythm, Oh Lady Be Good, Strike Up the Band, I Got Rhythm. And then we've also got some of his more specifically classically orientated pieces. Anyway, this is just a lovely record, beautifully engineered. After a good clean, it sounds dead quiet. Something else you should look out for are the series of Scott Joplin records put out by Nonesuch when the Sting became such a huge hit. And these were recorded by Joshua Rifkin, and they are just lovely recordings, beautiful performances. Anyway, piano music by George Gershwin, just a couple of bucks. So on this trip to Amoeba back in December, they had clearly just bought up a collection from a collector who was very into contemporary music, and maybe even a Japanese collector, because a lot of these were Japanese issues. Anyway, I just couldn't believe the stuff I was finding in the bins. Really exciting, and I'm going to show them to you now. We'll start off with this one. This is a record I had been looking for years. I'd almost bought it online a couple of times, but this is really special, and it's kind of ground zero for contemporary 20th century electronic music. This is the piece Kontakte by Stockhausen, and I showed in an earlier video, one of the Deutsche Grammophon Gems videos, I showed the version of Kontakte put out by Deutsche Grammophon, which is just the tape part of the piece. Well, this is the first recording, which is of the version which combines the tape recording and a small instrumental group. And you've got here David Tudor playing the piano, and we've got percussion by Tudor and Christoph Kaskel, and then you've got the electronic contingent. And this is on the label Virgo, which is one of the main labels for 20th century avant-garde music. This is not a first edition, but this is the one you're most likely to find, and it's just fine. That's what the label looks like. This was actually the record that introduced me to Stockhausen. There was a copy of this in our record library at school, and I just fell in love with this piece. I mean, it's not for everyone, and I like both versions. I like listening to both the tape version and then the version of tape and instruments, which is this. But I was so happy to find this in beautiful condition. It was like, I don't know, 10 bucks maybe, a little bit more expensive. One of the great things about classical is you often find stuff dirt cheap. A lot of stores don't really know what they've got on their hands. Amoeba's pretty good. Their buyers have a pretty good sense of what records are worth on the used market, but even they often underprice stuff. And then sometimes occasionally slightly overprice it. But anyway, this was a great bargain. I'm just thrilled to have it. So they had bought from his collector a whole bunch of Japanese issues. And there's just some wonderful stuff in there. Now I'm going to start off with two records by the great electronic music populist, as it were, Japan's answer to Walter Carlos, who did the Switched on Bach records, and that is Tomita. And Tomita did these really fun realizations on synthesizers of classical music, and this is his most famous one, and I think still his best. This is all of music of Claude Debussy, Clair de Lune, a bunch of other shorter pieces. It's a typical Japanese issue. You've got all the Japanese writing. Now, sometimes you have an insert which has stuff in English, not on this particular occasion. Now, I have this on CD, but it's really nice to have this on good Japanese vinyl. The thing with Japanese issues, let me just restrict myself to the classical world for the moment, is that the actual quality of the vinyl is excellent, really quiet. Where you might be lacking a little bit is in the mastering. Sometimes these Japanese issues are a little bass shy. You just have to kind of experiment and see what you can find. Certainly in rock and pop, sort of Japanese issues from the 60s and 70s, some of them are way better than others. But for something like this, where it's a Japanese artist, they're probably working from the original master tape, and this just sounds great. And the other Tomita record I picked up was Pictures at an Exhibition, his realization of the Mussorgsky piano piece. And this is, again, just a blast. So much fun to put on your record player and turn right up. Just tremendous stuff. Now, moving into some of the more esoteric classical contemporary stuff. And we have here a bunch of recordings of music by Toru Takemitsu. Toru Takemitsu, I think, is still hugely underrated. He was really the central figure in the avant-garde in Japan. But the interesting thing is, compared to some of his European counterparts, he leavened his adoption of, the most contemporary approach to music, to composition, with, the fact that he was Japanese, drawing on traditional Japanese orchestration, instrumentation, and I think his music is some of the most accessible and enjoyable of the hardcore avant-garde composers of the 20th century. And actually, I'm not even sure I'd call him hardcore, not in the way I would someone like Stockhausen and Boulez, because I always get the feeling with Takemitsu, he wants his music to be listened to and enjoyed. So he doesn't sacrifice accessibility, enjoyability of the music, on the altar of being dogmatic. More Takemitsu. These are all records put out by Deutsche Grammophon, and I'm not even sure any of these were, or all of them were put out on just regular Deutsche Grammophon. They may have been exclusively for the Japanese market, but here we have more Takemitsu. Again, look at this absolutely gorgeous cover. And this is of music with the great oboist Heinz Holliger. You've got flautist Nicolai and Ursula Holliger on harp, and the Basel Ensemble, a well-known chamber orchestra group. Now, this record I do have in an English pressing. This is of music, orchestral music with percussion. The conductor is Seiji Ozawa, the great Japanese conductor who worked with the Boston Symphony Orchestra for many, many years. And also featured on this is Stomu Yamash'ta, one of the legendary percussionists. And I featured one of his solo records in my video, 5 records off the beaten track. Like I say, I had this in an English pressing, but it's a rather noisy English pressing. So I had really wanted to see what this would sound like on Japanese vinyl. And sure enough, it's dead quiet, sounds great. And you can see, actually this has, I think, an insert. Yes, all in Japanese, which is, my Japanese is not very good, but what's fascinating is you actually get extracts from the score and then some wonderful photos here. I mean, the packaging on these Japanese issues is just gorgeous. This is from EMI. Again, I don't know if this was ever issued in a US pressing on Capitol or Angel or whatever. Avoid it like the plague. This is a really wonderful recording. If you want to explore something a little bit off the beaten track, I highly recommend this. another Japanese issue of a record, which I seem to remember, I think I remember when this came out. I didn't get it at the time. This is a Deutsche Grammophon record by the great cellist Siegfried Palm. And Palm really specialized in modern contemporary music, and he commissioned all kinds of new pieces for cello. I mean, I think he comes second only to Rostropovich in terms of commissioning new works. Unlike Rostropovich, Palm is definitely more orientated towards the real avant-garde. So you've got pieces by composers like Webern, Xenakis, Kegel, Zimmermann, Penderecki, Brown, and Yun. This is just lovely, very unusual repertoire, not necessarily the easiest of listens, but beautiful pressing. And I don't have an original German pressing to compare it with, but I imagine this is probably quite a vinyl, dead quiet, and probably the mastering is every bit as good.